Good evening. Welcome to the August 22nd Washougal City Council Workshop Meeting. Jennifer, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Costin? Here. Councilmember Shoemaker?
Here.
Councilmember Russell?
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel?
Here.
Councilmember Delavar?
Present.
Councilmember Greenlee?
Here.
And Councilmember Morris.
Here.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to address council before we get started this evening? Okay, seeing none, going into agenda bills, community development. Mitch?
Thank you, Your Honor. If you bear with me, I will.
Do I need to prepare?
There are several whereases.
Thank you, Your Honor. The issue before us this evening is regarding medical marijuana, and as a reminder to the council that there will be a hearing on September 6th regarding the emergency ordinance that you adopted. I wanted to make note that the city administrator passed out a revised draft ordinance for you to look at, and I'd kind of like to step through a little bit of that this evening and get a little more background for this issue. Under federal law, marijuana is classified as a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substance Act. That means that the possession, growing, or distribution and knowingly facilitating the above, and I'll get into that a little bit in a minute here, even for medicinal purposes, is a violation of federal law. Now, it's a violation of federal law regardless of individual state statutes permitting such uses. And so that's federal law, and then we get into what the state law attempted to do or did. In 1998, Initiative 692 was passed by the voters of Washington. It's codified as the RCW 69.51A. It decriminalized the possession and limited use of medical marijuana for patients who are under a physician's care and who suffered from a terminal or debilitating illness. In 2007, the law was expanded. It allowed patients to receive assistance from designated providers, and it broadened the definition of diseases and conditions that medical marijuana could be prescribed for. Then in 2011, the state passed SB 5073. This is mostly due to a concern with the lack of safe and sufficient medical marijuana for patients. It was put into place as a state structure to license and regulate the use, distribution, and processing of medical marijuana. And when that was done, you're very aware that the governor vetoed several portions of that bill. And out of concern that these new laws would be in conflict with federal law, the governor requested a legal opinion from the U.S. Department of Justice. And part of that, which you have tonight, James Cole, Deputy Attorney General, stated that persons who are in the business of cultivating, selling or distributing marijuana, and those who knowingly facilitate such activities are in violation of the Controlled Substance Act, regardless of state law. So this gets back to my earlier slide that it's a violation of state law that we knowingly are facilitating those activities of distribution and whatnot, and we license or permit them as such. The governor, in her veto, was quoted in her explanation of veto, stated that absent congressional action, state laws will not protect an individual from legal action by the federal government. She also went on to say that the United States attorneys have made it clear that state law would not provide these individuals, meaning in this case state employees, safe harbor from federal prosecution, and no state employee should be required to violate federal criminal law in order to fulfill the duties under state law. So that's kind of where it is at the state level, and so it's really been kicked to the local jurisdiction to look at and how to regulate it, and fairly or unfairly, I guess. The ordinance before you this evening or that you'll be hearing on the 6th, does a few things. Staff proposes that it extend the moratorium for a 12-month time period. We have that ability under state law in adopting that emergency ordinance. We also, in that ordinance, you'll see some whereases that recognize the contradiction between federal and state law, and we draw those out, and we're looking at how to best move through this process and what, if any, action should be taken. And it acknowledges that a work plan will be developed to create a locals ordinance related to that if the city finds that action needs to be taken in that regard. I would like to let the council know that there's a few things that are going on. One, the county, basically, they extended their moratorium. You'll notice in the language that we put before you that it says that we may look at not developing any ordinances until there's some action taken by the federal and state government in resolving this kind of legal conundrum, if you will. The county went one step further and said, we're absolutely not going to do anything until that legal question has been answered between the federal and the state government. So as you can imagine, the state, we anticipate that the state will take another shot at this, the next legislature, and possibly address some inconsistencies or at least provide clarification for local municipalities in order to move it forward. And in that deliberation, we have to consider what is really in the best interest of the best public interest of Washougal, and whether or not, as a council, we want to actually go through that effort of creating zoning laws and ordinances that may in and of themselves be subject to challenge and definitely could be subject to change, quite possibly in the very near future. And so with that, I'll open it to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mitch. Just wanted to elaborate just a little bit. When we presented this emergency ordinance to you almost 60 days ago, the primary reasoning for declaring an emergency was the ambiguity around the provisions of the state law and what we could do at the local level, specifically around some details around zoning regulations and what we could and couldn't do, and wanting to have the time to adequately address those issues. That continues to be an issue and remains a very important issue, as you can imagine. Our research over the last couple of months, and particularly just in the last week or so, has informed us in a couple of other regards that Mitch got into. One is that this conflict between federal law and state law and these opinions out of the U.S. Attorney's Office and some of the reasoning behind Gregoire's veto to veto those portions of the law that would have put the state in the business of licensing and regulating. And the veto took them out of that business, but allowed us to at our option, get into that business. And her stated reason, as you saw, for doing that was to shield state employees from the possibility of being in violation of the Controlled Substance Act. And that was based upon the expressed opinion of a U.S. attorney. Now, you may be aware of the fact that the U.S. attorney has also given direction in previous years to its various attorneys that prosecuting individuals who are in possession of or who on the government level are facilitating kind of a small context with respect to this issue, small amounts or the small context may not be the best use of their resources when they're chasing major dealers and major illegal activities of all kinds around violations of the Controlled Substance Act. In their recent direction to their attorneys, though, because there's been some activity, I don't want to call it a flurry of activity, but there's been some activity at various states and local levels to, in some cases, greatly expand the programming around medical marijuana and the production of medical marijuana, even beyond the scope of what is contemplated in Washington. Indicated that it wasn't the intent of their previous direction about it may not be a good use of their resources to go after some of the smaller things to protect necessarily these other contexts. It leaves it somewhat ambiguous as to whether or not any government employee or a governing body that facilitates a violation of the Controlled Substance Act by passing its ordinances or setting up programs for licensing and permitting and the like would potentially have some difficulties with the federal government. It's ambiguous. That information has become a serious consideration for us as we're advising you in this regard, as you can imagine, for all of your sakes and for our sakes. In addition to the fact that it's just a complex issue, even if it is in the public interest in Washougal for us to develop those types of regulations, we need time, and that's the reason for the ask for the statutorily granted maximum 12-month moratorium, and that is why you'll find, I believe, I learned over this last week as well, that communities in Clark County that have enacted moratoria are all moving in that direction to ask their councils to go for the 12 months. The county has already done it. Vancouver will be doing that when they have their hearing. Camas is leaning toward doing that as well. For the reason that we need the time, like we said last time, but also this question of conflict with the federal government and that serious issue needs to be resolved. And Mitch hit on this a little bit in the last point that I'll make. Even if there wasn't this issue regarding legislative bodies or staff being in violation of the Controlled Substance Act and running into problems, even if that wasn't out there, the state is likely, because of this veto and because of the interested parties that are advocating with respect to this issue, the legislature is likely to take this issue up again in its next session. That's not a guarantee, but it seems likely that that would be the case. And we could spend quite a bit of energy here at the staff level and your energy deliberating through detailed regulations around regulating, only to find the carpet pulled out from underneath us by some state action. And it's our recommendation in this moratorium that we sort of sit back and defer and wait, even on developing regulations, until the legislature has had a chance to act or not act. That's what the county is doing. The county is going even further, and Commissioner Stewart, I think, speaking on behalf of the other commissioners who agreed at their deliberations on this issue, indicated in no uncertain terms that they passed a resolution that says they do not intend ever to promulgate regulations around this issue as long as this conflict exists with the federal law. We are not recommending to you that strong of a statement at this point, but we wanted you to be aware of that. It may be that that would be the council's desire. And if that's the case, there's a mechanism for that, and that is a continued sequence of moratoria. Finding each time that this ambiguity and inconsistency exists. So it's very difficult, and a complex situation. Your hearing that you have on the 6th, you were having because of the fact that you passed a moratorium and you have to have a hearing. It can also be used to take testimony around this notion of going to a 12-month moratorium, which is what our advice is. It gives you a couple weeks to look through this draft. And if you have any questions, certainly please contact Mitch or I, and we can talk to you. You'll notice that it is very much the same as the ordinance that you passed previously, with some whereases that were added around what we just talked about. And we know that we just passed this out to you, as this has been kind of a late-breaking effort, as is the case with this. But you do have a couple of weeks until the hearing, and we'll be asking you after your hearing to pass an ordinance that does a 12-month moratorium and acknowledges the things that we described.
Council questions?
I have a question. So there are a couple of different issues, well, many different issues that come up with this moratorium. What would be the effect of not passing the moratorium and not regulating or passing specific zoning regulations?
You would open it up to anyone that wants to file for a permit anywhere in the city.
Or not file for a permit, potentially. And that's one of the unknown, what would, if somebody set up shop, basically, purporting to be operating under the recent statute and did not come to us because we didn't regulate, would we regulate? How would we regulate? Would it be prohibited because it's not listed as an approved use, or would we do nothing? Would that potentially answer and mitigate against that concern about being in violation, knowingly facilitating? Potentially that would, but it does open us up to folks setting up shop, maybe.
If somebody comes for a permit, applies for a permit, are we obligated under state law to give it to them?
I don't think they'd be applying for a permit, correct me if I'm wrong. All they'd be applying for is potentially a business license.
Yeah, that's one avenue I think I could foresee that it would take, is if they applied for a business license, and we would probably be denying that based on a land use. You know, it's not a use that's prescribed under our zoning ordinance. And then, you know, we'd have to either make a similar use determination that it was similar to something else. But a lot of the issues that are surrounding these, that potentially negative impacts, none of that has been vetted through any kind of public process, or, you know, the impacts of that, whether or not it should be a permitted use outright, whether or not it should have, you know, conditional use permit status, or proximity to other land uses, neighborhood versus commercial versus industrial. None of that stuff has been done for all the other uses, specifically for all the other uses that we have within our zoning ordinance. None of that work has been done.
Rod?
I would like to take time and read through this, of course, as we've talked about already, but you said the county took no action and they're not going to take action. Did they put a moratorium on it for 12 months?
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
the action they took
They
then?
took the 12-month moratorium, but then they stated in their resolution, I believe they did it by resolution, they stated in their resolution that they intend to not promulgate any regulations around collective gardens and everything that was permitted under the state law in the recent legislation until such time as there is no longer a conflict between that state law and the Controlled Substance Act. That could be quite a long time, as you can imagine, or that could be resolved anytime the Congress or our own state legislature acted. So they've kind of basically gone on notice publicly that even though the state has given the permission for local governments in Washington to promulgate regulations around collective gardens and dispensaries, they do not intend to do so. And then they, in parallel, enacted a 12-month moratorium.
Other questions?
I just wanted to make a couple of comments. Not surprisingly, the issue of marijuana coverage, medical marijuana coverage, came up for the Employee Benefits Trust, and we were informed by our attorney that we were in no way compelled to offer coverage for medical marijuana, and so there therefore is no coverage within the Employee Benefits Trust medical coverage. Secondly, when the Association of Washington Cities legislative team was there, they were asked what was going on about that, and they said, as certain as anything ever gets certain about a legislature that has not yet met, this law will be redone in the next legislature. That both majority leaders, the minority leader and the ranking member, have all stated unequivocally that they intend to bring forward new legislation on this subject. So it would seem to me that, given as you say, that they could easily pull a rug out from under us, that we don't want to be standing on it.
John?
Have we had anyone contact the city in favor of medical marijuana dispensaries or?
Seattle passed regulations.
No, did anyone contact our city?
Oh,
Yes. That's why I guess I really don't have high, I know we have to go through the,
Well,
through the public hearing aspect of it, but I really don't have high hopes of anyone coming and giving their name and their address and talking in support of marijuana. So I don't have a lot of high hopes for this public hearing, but, you know, I know we have to go through it if we're going to try to pass an ordinance.
Mayor, Mitch,
we did have one, but it was before, it was about a year ago that they came in when the building on Washougal River Road and East Street was up for sale again, inquiring about whether or not he could open a shop there.
Jennifer?
This kind of brings me back to the question I had before, which was concerning our law enforcement and how our officers are to handle, you know, these situations when they come upon these. And do we have, I mean, there is no law that contradicts the state law in the city of Washougal.
correct. There is an affirmative defense under the previous statutory construct for individuals who are legitimately under the state law possessing and using and producing medical marijuana, and there's a program for how that is verified. And if there's a situation with an individual that our law enforcement folks come across and it's verified to be legitimate under that, they basically don't prosecute. That's
So-
basically where it's at. Now, if somebody in their backyard sets up a garden with 45 plants and says they're doing it for no more than 10 people and meets all the sort of the parameters around the allowances in this recent statute, that would not, absent anything that we passed, that would not be legal. So today, that would not be legal if it exceeded the current program, which I think it would. So yes, without a moratorium, potentially someone would try to do that and try to assert a defense that they were operating under the statute, and that would be a very interesting first case through the courts.
Yeah, I could definitely see a challenge there, particularly because if the city is taking a step back and issuing a moratorium, then there isn't an opportunity to even apply for a permit.
Correct.
Can't even ask.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Michael?
So you say that would not be legal. So right now, if somebody's growing some plants for their own personal use, they have their own medical marijuana card, is that legal under city law?
We don't have anything specifically that permits that proactively. We operate under the state penal provisions and criminal provisions, and so it becomes ours in that way. In fact, you recall an ordinance not that long ago with Don, even maybe at your last meeting or the one prior, where we improved the way that we reference the state law for the various criminal citations. So it's not that we have proactively permitted it. It's a state level affirmative defense.
Wouldn't that be in violation of the Federal Controlled Substance Act?
It is in violation. Absolutely it is. You are correct, Counselor. Currently, individuals who avail themselves of that affirmative defense under Washington statute are in violation of the Federal Controlled Substance Act. There is a memorandum from the U.S. Attorney to the various U.S. attorneys in states or localities where that is a possible issue, indicating that you have limited resources, and in the small scale context, that may not be the best use of the U.S. Attorney's resources to prosecute in those cases, given the bigger fish that they would have to fry. But a recent, which means effectively that potentially nothing would happen. The recent memorandum from the U.S. Attorney to his various attorneys is that the expansion of those smaller scale type programs into larger ones, that is starting to happen in some localities and in some states, and indeed our own state to some extent, not to the extent that others, that the intent of the previous memo wasn't necessarily to shield from any and all such activities, clearly leaving it, drew no bright line as to, what is small enough to not be a wise use of their resources. So it's a difficult situation, and it was enough for Governor Gregoire to veto 2/3 or half of the provisions of a statute such that state officers and employees would not be in a situation where that question could even come up.
Other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you, Mitch. See you in a couple of weeks. Jeanette, Human Resources, ordinances regarding the Salary Commission amendments.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, Council. So this is really simply a housekeeping item that you have in front of you. As you know, the Salary Commission decides on the salaries of the elected officials, and the way the current language, the code is written in 2.04.020 is somewhat in conflict, in that by you annually or whatever time period approve this, it's already been decided by the Salary Commission. So it's been Don English's advice to repeal that one section of the code, and so that's the action that I'm asking you to take.
Questions from council?
No.
Jennifer?
Yep. On the proposed language, you have just one paragraph listed as one in parentheses, but the sentence as referencing something above it says further. Further from what?
Okay.
We're removing the
Oh,
actual.
okay, that's a good point. Probably need to omit that word, because it is inferring that, a section above. Good, thank you.
Dave?
So, pardon me, with the deletion of that word, there is still another section in here that provides for some sort of stipend for the mayor and the council, right?
For travel expenses. For expenses that council incurs,
Okay.
correct? Not salaries, as the section above indicates. That is
sa-
governed by the Salary Commission.
Okay, so there's a salary that attaches to the positions that remains.
Yeah.
That is correct, and that is approved by the Salary Commission, and we have
Yes.
code that indicates that. This was going to simply take this out in terms of the actual numbers that's currently included in the code.
Okay, what is the current
The current salaries?
salary?
1,800 for the mayor and 450 for council members once the cycle turns over in terms of your seats.
Okay, thank you.
Molly?
No, I was just going to say, I talked to Jeanette before the meeting about this, and she clarified it for me. So basically, since the Salary Commission is the governing body on the salary, then for us to actually take action on it is redundant at the very least and immaterial. So that's why the language, one of the main reasons the language was removed, because the Salary Commission determines our salary.
Would also seem to be a conflict of interest.
It is,
Yeah, it would, yes, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
nice catch.
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, Jeanette.
Okay.
Public Works, Mr. Dunn.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. First agenda bill that we have for Public Works is to award the bid for the South Side Sidewalk project. And as you recall, the council passed a budget amendment earlier in the year. And this is moving forward with that South Side Sidewalk project. The expenditure required is $184,919. And we are recommending that we award the bid to Integrity Excavation and Construction. The engineer's estimate was $189,000. And so we are well within the budget amendment that we asked for originally. There are some engineering costs associated with this too, but we're about around 30K under with the South Side sidewalk, so we're pretty happy about that. And recommended action is to award the contract for the South Side sidewalk project to Integrity Excavation and Construction and authorize the mayor to sign the contract documents. Are there any questions?
Dave?
I just want to make sure that I've got this straight. You have the money for this because of the budget amendment that was passed in March,
That's correct.
which took the money out of reserves.
That's
So this project is being funded from reserves.
correct.
Thank you.
So originally, when we were discussing this project, we mentioned that it would be cheaper to do it now because of the potentially mobilization costs. But I don't think we're currently employing Integrity Excavation, is that correct?
That is correct, yes. West Tech Construction, they actually landed 2 jobs, one in Tualatin and one in Sandy, Oregon, and they decided not to bid on the project. But we are under engineer's estimate, so we're happy about that.
Yes, will this require any shutdown of the roads to have this done?
We should be working on the side of the road, and there should be plenty of room there with the right-of-way that we have, the bike lane. We may have to shut down a portion of the lane and move people over to the center lane slightly in areas. I don't think there'll be any major shutdowns. There could be some short duration shutdown, but we should be able to squeeze everybody by there fairly easily.
Okay, and the timeframe for completion?
We are looking, end of October is our hope. Obviously, weather is gonna come into play, at the end of the year, so, we're hoping end of October.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, award of bid to Haskins Electric.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This is, to award bid to Haskins Electric for the lighting procurement project that we have. This is our interior building lights. And actually, our engineer's estimate on this project was $53,725. We don't have a complete bid tabulation in your packet. This is kind of a different project because it's a smaller project and it's more straightforward, so we didn't have a complete bid tabulation. So the recommended action is to award the contract for the Washougal Lighting Procurement Project to Haskin Electric Incorporated and authorize the mayor to sign the contract documents. Are there any questions?
Molly?
Can you just clarify the term omission of acknowledgement of addendums to the contract? I think I know what it means, but I want to make sure.
Yes,
And
we
this
had
would be
an
for
addendum.
Aggie.
I'm sorry, yes, we had an addendum to the contract that we sent out to all the bidders. And it was basically that they would work nights, after hours, and possibly weekends to install the lights. And they omitted the addendum in the first place, so they were not the most qualified or eligible bidder on the project. So we had to go with the second lowest bid on this project.
Is this part of the energy efficiency lighting program?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thanks.
Dave?
I want to call it by a different name, make sure I've got the same thing. Is this the LED project?
This is not LED lights. These are high efficiency T8 lights. We initially looked at LED lights for installation, and the engineer's recommendation was to go with high efficiency.
Okay, so it's not part of that LED project that we got a grant for?
It is part of the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant. Originally, in the grant application, LED lights were what we were thinking about installing. As we got into it and as the engineer looked at went through the process, we decided on the high efficiency T8s.
Okay, so this is funded by the grant, is it not?
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions?
What kind of lighting is it, do you know?
Fluorescent.
So it's just fluorescent light bulbs?
High efficiency
High
fluorescence.
efficiency T8 light bulbs, they're gonna be a little bit different than the ones you see above you. They'll have kind of an open look, they'll have some louvers on top, and you can take out the lens. The lens increases the amount of light that you get also. And it'll also, we'll cut down those 4 bulbs to 2 bulbs. And I can show you the one in my office. There's one installed in my office if anybody wants to look at it.
I'm just curious, Jim, what was the rationale for not going with the LED?
Originally, the LED lights would not pass L&I inspection. So we went with the high-efficiency T8s. They now have a solution for that, where they can put some tags up on the lights, and they will pass the L&I inspection now. But at the time when we went through the process, we weren't able to use the LEDs.
Thank you. Jim, were the other cities that were participating in this in accordance with doing all the same things we're doing here?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, scatter gardens.
Yes, if you remember, back on August 1st, this same agenda bill came before you, and there was some concern with the terminology scattered garden. We actually did some research into Washington Administrative Code, and the term scatter garden is used frequently, and the term scatter as a verb is used as well. This went to before the cemetery board, and I believe Molly did some research into this as well. Councilmember Costin, excuse me. And we are just asking that we read the ordinance by title only, pass, post, and publish in the usual manner. Are there any questions?
Okay. We're good. Thank you, Jim. That brings us to the point in the agenda for members of the public. If you've got any comments for council prior to us finishing up the meeting? Don?
Hello, Don Bolin, 32934 Southeast 20th. And I just listened to your folks' discussion on marijuana. I don't know where you're going, but just from what I've heard, I would think it would be pretty simple. We ought to obey the federal law, and spending any more time trying to figure out why we shouldn't be, as far as I'm concerned, a waste of staff's time. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Don. Martha?
Thank you. I just have an announcement. I don't know if you recall that you have a Clark County Arts Commission in Clark County with 11 members on the commission. I'm your Washougal representative. And we have a public meeting at your convenience tomorrow evening at 6:30 at the Port of Camas Washougal meeting room. This is a public meeting. We've been almost together about a year, being born, and this is an advisory committee appointed by the Clark County Commissioners to help raise awareness and facilitate the arts in Clark County in every aspect. So we're working really hard on what that's going to be, how we're going to gather funding. It's a pretty important group. We have people that represent every community in Clark County. So when we get together, it's pretty wonderful to find out what everyone's doing and to try and get a presence in Clark County in regards to the arts. And my specific interest is Washougal, of course, and raising the awareness here. So I hope you can come. It's a public meeting, so you're all welcome, and it's okay.
Thank you, Martha.
Any questions about that?
Martha, you
Yes.
what time?
6:30.
Okay, we have a meeting tomorrow night here with the Planning Commission, correct, on the public hearing for the Planning Commission on Transportation Capital Facilities Plan? Is that tomorrow night?
Planning Commission has 3 hearings tomorrow. School capital facility plans for Camas and Washougal, and the transportation capital facility plan.
Okay, there'll be more meetings. We meet once a month. It's the last Tuesday, well, the 4th Tuesday of every month.
Thank you, Martha. Any other members of the public wishing to address the council? Okay, I have no updates for you this evening. David, do you have any? Okay. Anything from council? Rod?
Yeah, I would like to open up discussion on, and Mitch has to be a part of this as well, but one of the things that irritates me anymore, and we have yard sales, my parents have done yard sales forever, and you look downtown and it just looks trashy with people that put signs up on posts and all the decorating we've done downtown and money we've put into it, and it just looks trashy. And I'm just curious if there's a solution to how to police this a little bit better than it is. And it's staff time, I know that, but when someone comes to our community and looks at what's happening out there, I think that's a poor deal for the rest of the community, the way that those signs are taped, glued, wired to the signs. And I would like to open up that discussion and see where we can, if there's any way to police it.
I bet Mitch has made a note. Okay.
And I ask all the council to give it thought as well, just so that we can come up with the right solution to, I almost feel like sometimes we need to send somebody out on Monday morning and collect those things and put down the address and walk up and tell them at their, because they give you an address where to go to, so it's pretty easy, pretty simple to get there.
Mitch, if you would maybe talk with Sherry and put together a game plan for a future workshop to come back and let us know how we're handling that now and what's allowed, how it's allowed, and what we may be able to do with it.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Looks like it's kind of a one-time, it's just a stretch of the summertime period that we really would have to worry about it, but some of those things, and then they stay up there till they fall off in the street, and then everybody drives over them, and it's just a mess, so.
Other items from council? David?
A year ago, we put together a resolution in favor of first responders, and what I wanted to do was see if there's any sentiment for doing that again this year.
I believe I've got it on a note for staff. My assumption was that was an annual thing that we wanted to make sure and do for the September 11th date.
You're way ahead of me.
I don't know about way ahead, but yeah, we'll bring that forward. Any other items? Okay. We're adjourned.